Today, negative equity rears its ugly head. Hello again, I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. As home prices fall, the risks of households with mortgages falling into negative equity is rising. This has the potential to have significant economic consequences for households and the community more generally. And I discussed this with Frank Chung from news.com.au yesterday, who posted an article based on the DFA analysis. As house price falls accelerate, a growing number of mortgage holders across the country are being left in the negative equity prison. And today I want to take that forward further. And by the way, if you value the content we produce, please do consider joining our Patreon program. Here's the link. Or make a donation via PayPal. Again, here is the link, so that you can help us to continue to make great content. Negative equity is a simple concept. The mortgage you owe on a property is worth more than the current market value of that property. This means that if a household needs to sell, they will be left with an outstanding debt to the bank. And meantime, because of the higher risks, borrowers might potentially face higher interest rates. And if you're forced to sell due to a change of circumstances, such as the loss of job, then you are in trouble because Australia has what is known as full recourse, meaning your debt stays with you regardless of your financial situation. Now, why is this so relevant? Well, first, forecasts are growing darker for how much further the market has to fall, and consensus is beginning to circle around the all-important 20%, with 15 out of 21 economists and experts polled by finder.com.au backing that figure. As they put it, the reason the 20% figure is so crucial is that most lenders require a 20% deposit. And if you borrow with a 20% deposit and prices fall by 20%, obviously you're going to be in equity parity. Any further, and you're going to be in negative equity. And this is the first time we've seen declines forecast starting to push into negative equity territory. Now, data from APRA, their property exposure figures, showed that banks wrote nearly 26,000 new mortgages with a loan-to-value ratio of more than 90% over the last year, and a further 51,000 with a loan-to-value ratio of between 80 and 90%. So that is 20% of all loans written in the same period. And I would expect the number of loans written above 80% to fall significantly ahead as lenders tighten their standards further. But it's also worth remembering that in some cases existing borrowers have pulled more equity out to allow them, for example, to pass funds to their kids, the so-called bank of mum and dad. And in the case of a forced sale, the market value may well be overstated relative to the true recovery value of the property. But using a property as an ATM just does not work in a falling market. Now, last month, a Roy Morgan survey of 10,000 borrowers found that 8.9% were slipping into negative equity, up from 8% 12 months prior. That would work out to around 386,000 Australians. And we've run our own analysis based on our core market model with data to the end of November. And on our modelling, currently there are around 400,000 households across the country in negative equity, across both owner-occupied and investor properties. There are about 3.25 million owner-occupied borrowers and at least 1.25 million investor borrowers. So overall, around 10% of properties are currently underwater. And as you know, we run a range of potential scenarios. But if our central case works out with an average fall of, say, 20 to 25%, our modelling suggests that around 650,000 households would fall into negative equity. My more severe case, if an international crisis hits, is for a 40% price fall. And once there, you're getting close to 1 million households being hit by negative equity. Now, that would be catastrophic for the economy. And that would be analogous to what happened in Ireland, where prices dropped 40%. A decade later, there are still people in negative equity there who have never recovered. The next question to consider is which households are being impacted. In fact, negative equity is touching lots of different segments of the market for different reasons, but collectively it is an early warning sign of what may come ahead. For example, people in Western Australia who bought at the peak of the mining boom have seen prices fall by around 15% over the past 5 or 6 years, but in some locations so much more than that. So there are pockets of negative equity there. More recent first-time buyers, perhaps enticed by first home buyer grants, and particularly those who purchased in the past 6 to 12 months, are now underwater, particularly if they bought new properties. This is because newly built properties are losing value faster than established ones. It's like buying a new car. As soon as you drive it off the lot, it drops by 15 to 20% in value. Then there are highly leveraged property investors, often with overlapping mortgages. Quite often we see investors with multiple properties all going underwater. And that's the real sharp end, actually, of this whole phenomenon. Meanwhile, investors in, for example, places like Brisbane, who purchased off the plan, let's say apartments 18 months ago, are now being required to pony up and complete the purchase, but the valuations are coming in at 15 to 20% below the original price. Realestate.com.au chief economist Nerida Kozebi was quoted as saying that will be a problem for people trying to settle because the banks might not lend them what they now owe. And it could also be a problem for the developers. And it's not just first-time home buyers and investors. Property living in expensive suburbs are also feeling the pinch as prices are falling faster at the more expensive end of the market. And we're seeing pockets of negative equity in places you wouldn't expect to see it. For example, Bondi and Mosman in New South Wales and Toorak in Victoria. So there are some more affluent households now suddenly finding that they've got issues too. Now, let's consider the impact. Most obviously, it means you've lost any paper profit that you had. In fact, negative equity is a real bother. It really does have a very negative impact on the economy, households, and the wealth effect. As price rises, people feel more confident. So as they fall, the reverse is also true. And as you know, we believe the problem has been set up for decades by loose lending. There is a massive overhang of very highly indebted households. And this was a correction that was always going to come. The question now is how far and how fast. And negative equity also causes banks to get twitchy because it means that they now have a risk on their book, which could mean that they need to consider the borrower's interest rate. This is because as the risk profile on that loan goes up, the banks will probably put some sort of risk premium on that loan. And we already know that many households are struggling with repayments because of flat incomes and rising costs. And by the way, we'll update our mortgage stress results tomorrow. People with negative equity have very few options except trying to pay it off and wait for the market to rise. If you do sell, chances are you'll still have a loan remaining. And history teaches us that people stay put. It basically means you're stuck. You're a prisoner in your own property. You just keep paying off the loan, though if you're an investor, you may choose to sell and get out before the losses get worse. As distressed sales mount, so prices will fall further. Banks, of course, should also reappraise the risks in their mortgage books and will need to lift provisions accordingly, which will depress profitability and require them to hold more capital. Realestate.com.au said that people have gotten used to rising prices. But when you look historically, the people that do well are those that hold through the down and up cycles. And if you look at the worst price crash that we saw in the 80s, it took about 4 years for prices to recover. You need to be mindful that property is a long-term game. It pays to hold. It doesn't pay to panic sell. And if you have an investment property and it's gone underwater, but you have a stable tenant and can afford to pay off the loan, try and get through this cycle. The biggest problem when prices fall is that we start to see distress sales when people can't service the loan, they said. Now, I agree that the main thing to do is don't panic. If you're not forced to sell and can continue to make your payments, it's a paper problem, and most people will be in that situation. But if you are forced to sell due to a change of circumstance, such as a loss of job, then you are in trouble. And Australia has what's known as full recourse, meaning your debt stays with you regardless of your financial situation. And reflect on this. A decade after the GFC, there are still households in both Ireland and the UK who still remain in negative equity now, with little prospect of property values recovering to pre-crash levels a decade beyond. It seems to me the path ahead will be a rocky road, and just how big the potholes will be determined by the extent of the falls and the length of the negative equity trap. As prices are still likely to fall further, anyone thinking of buying now needs to be very, very careful. We are in for a long haul. As always, if you like what you've seen here today, please share and like the post and add a comment or question. I read them all. And if you want to join the growing band of subscribers who receive alerts when we release new posts, do subscribe now by hitting the subscribe bell. And if you have already subscribed, many thanks. I really appreciate your support and participation. I'm Martin North, the Principal Analyst at Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.